Who is the undisputed greatest fighter of all time? Well, MMA has had a lot of GOATs in its history, but now with a lot of disputes. But it's time to look at what makes a legendary fighter. So is the topic of today's video, as we'll be discussing the GOAT fighter according to public opinion. Although MMA is not really a historical sport, even at its age of 29 years, the entire world has been driven by it. You do know how crazy fighters get in the cage, right? Well, their fans get even crazier when it comes to taking sides. Some people think that if Jon Jones retired, he's the GOAT for sure. While if he's not retired, then it can be GSP, Anderson Silva, Matt Hughes, Khabib, Cejudo, and Cormier in the same order respectively. On the contrary, another fan argues that MMA is full of massive talents, and it's become quite difficult to choose any one of them. However, some UFC fighters outshined in the past years, such as Kamaru Usman, Charles Oliveira, Francis Ngannou, and Israel Adesanya. This fan is surely giving contemporaries a fair chance. However, he's still speculating if these champions will be able to preserve their dominance in their divisions. But no matter what, it is indeed clear that these names stand out from the rest, and they do have a chance. Another ardent fan of MMA has named 3 MMA fighters as the best, and he considers all 3 of these to be a package of pure dominance over an elongated period of time. His 3 names are Anderson Silva, Jon Jones, and Georges St-Pierre. One wouldn't make a mistake by choosing any of these as their GOAT, because they are all unquestionably exceptional epitome of violence. What's the criterion for measuring a GOAT? We've been hearing the term GOAT now and then in almost every UFC event. Every other person has their own set of criteria. However, critics have evaluated ways to determine GOAT, and we'll be discussing some of them here. So, one of them says that every sports GOAT is supposed to have 2 things that are necessary for them to become one. The 2 must-have things are the unbreakable records and great highlights. Well, if a UFC fighter has these 2 things, then he'll definitely become a GOAT, despite being retired from the sports. So even if these athletes don't compete in today's MMA galas, their names will continue to be remembered through generations, as people will keep referencing them during games. So now, who do you think meets the criteria in the best possible way? Think about the list that you have in your mind and replay it to check if those highlights are going to play for generations. You'll get your answer. Some critics say that people tend to choose their favorite ones first and then set the criterion, whereas another one gives us a list of the criteria that they believe should be the universal criteria for choosing the GOAT. Leave your criterion in a comment below. Number 1, title defenses. According to this one, a fighter doesn't stand a chance of being a GOAT if they have never been a champion. Thus, if a fighter has won titles in various weight classes, it would be a plus point during the evaluation. Number 2, record. It's essential to look at the past record of the fighter. One has an undefeated pro career that has relatively greater value as compared to those who had to face losses in their early days. However, it doesn't mean that such people don't count, because obviously they do. It's only about the plus point that a fighter may get due to a clear check beginning in prime stage. Number 3, strength of schedule. In the present era, the only way to judge a fighter is to see how they fought in their prime times. It doesn't mean that he must have won all the competitions, but rather it can be compared to the opponent as well. Number 4, strength of victory. This point is not mandatory while determining a GOAT, because a win is a win no matter what strength has been used. However, if they're winning against a top-tier fighter, then it definitely becomes a plus point for the resume. Pound for pound disagreements. In MMA, a pound for pound scale is used that allows comparisons across weight divisions, within which fighters compete. Despite his injury, Georges St-Pierre proved he is still one of the most gifted fighters in the world by defeating Carlos Condit to win his undisputed welterweight title. Georges St-Pierre may have prepared himself in this way for a fight against Anderson Silva. That might decide who the best pound for pound fighter in MMA history is. It's somewhat annoying yet entertaining to discuss which MMA fighters are the best pound for pound. We all have a strong conviction that we already know who the finest fighter in the world is. It's wonderful to concur on who the best P4P is. It starts a discussion about memorable moments in that fighter's past, huge triumphs, and did you see that moments? However, disagreements on this subject sometimes become downright vicious. Records are compared, historic wins and losses are managed side by side, the notoriety of rivals is discussed, and chairs can be seen flying in the air often, although hopefully that hasn't happened to you. Why fans are against Dana White's opinion? Dana White is the UFC president, and he often gets criticized for sharing his opinions about the UFC fighters by their fans. Recently, Dana gave a statement saying that the UFC fighters get paid for what they ought to do, to disregard the notion of fighters being underpaid. He further claimed that they'll always want to make more money, but at the moment, they are getting what they deserve. However, fans were smart enough to get back at him as they replied to him saying that it is UFC that exploits its athletes via various loopholes. People know how top-tier fighters are getting paid huge sums. It's the bottom-tier fighters who are suffering from the lousy payday. It seems like the fans know everything as they further point out that UFC has been getting billions of dollars while the fighters hardly get to see about 17% of this total amount. Now that we're nearing the end of this video, who do you think deserves to be called the GOAT? Is it Khabib, GSP, Fedor Emelianenko, Jon Jones, or Amanda Nunes? One name that is stuck in hundreds of mouths is Khabib. This guy has an astonishing record of 29-0, as he has never even lost a round, let alone a fight. Whereas if we talk about Jon Jones, he won the title in 2011, and since then he's been fighting in championship fights. So, as compared to other fighters, he is the most accomplished one. Jon Jones is the earliest youngest guy to ever win a title. Times have changed for everyone, thus it's no exception for UFC and MMA. Today's top-tier fighters are not the same as the undefeated champions 10 years ago. They have acquired way more skills than them. If you go back in time and have a competition between today's fighter and a champion of that period, you'll definitely observe a contemporary taking over. Why do you think that is? Previously, fighters had to train in specific martial arts disciplines, like BJJ, kickboxing, etc. But now, MMA is a martial art of its own. Even fight duration has increased up to 32% as compared to the previous time. In UFC fights in 2002, 4 strikes were delivered on average every minute. Nowadays, UFC fights average twice as many strikes per minute, around 8.5. Fighters can continue working at a higher rate and producing more for longer. Hence, this is why a champion of older days doesn't stand a chance in front of today's UFC top-tier fighters. So, that's all for today. Tell us in the comments below which criterion you use for determining a GOAT. And until we see you in the next one, take care and stay safe.